They hit me with a $30,000 penalty for a cabin that wasn't even on HOA land. And when I proved it, everything flipped. Picture this. I'm standing inside my hand-built cedar hideaway, morning coffee steaming in the crisp mountain air, gripping a stack of legal papers ready to upend my neighborhood. The fresh scent of sawdust still hung from the last bit of trim, mixing with pine needles crunching under my boots. That ridiculous fine notice sat on my kitchen counter, demanding $30,000 for an unapproved structure, built 847 feet outside their reach. But here's what they didn't grasp about boundary lines, rotten HOA boards, and what happens when you push a retired electrician with nothing left to lose. What would you do if your HOA tried to fine you for something on your own ground? And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I'm sure you've got HOA nightmare tales too. My name's Colton Red, and 2 years ago I thought I had my retirement dialed in. 52 years old, 3 decades as a union electrician, and a modest stash that had let me spend my later years tinkering in the shop with my wife, June, cheering me on from the kitchen window. Cancer rewrote the plan. After June passed, I rattled around our house in Cedar Ridge Meadows like a marble in an empty coffee can. The HOA-approved beige walls felt like they were closing in, and every perfect lawn reminded me of weekend projects we'd never finished together. That's when I remembered Uncle Hank's 40-acre patch in the Colorado foothills. A strip of wilderness he left me that I'd barely visited since his funeral. The land sat about 300 yards past the last HOA sign, where manicured suburbia gives way to real pine trees and deer paths. Standing there that first morning, breathing sharp mountain air tinged with decomposing leaves, and listening to my diesel generator rumble awake, I knew exactly what I had to build. A small cabin, nothing fancy, just a place where a man could drink his coffee without someone measuring his grass. 30 years of electrical work teaches one thing above all: pull the right permits. I'd seen too many weekend warriors get burned going without paperwork. So I went straight to the county office and filed for everything. Structural, electrical, septic. Cost me another $300, but those little yellow tags would prove that 600-square-foot cabin was legal as Sunday morning bells. That's where Miranda Keaton enters. She's the sort who leads with her HOA title like she's royalty. HOA Board President Miranda Keaton, she'd announce, ramrod straight in designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly pension. At 58, she carried herself with the rigid posture of a longtime corporate HR operator, and I swear she wore that trained smile they teach in managing difficult employee seminars. She ran our 5-person HOA board like her personal fiefdom. Cedar Ridge Meadows was her crown jewel. Every mailbox painted the sanctioned shade of forest green, every fence post exactly 6 feet high, every flower bed filled from her approved species list. The woman kept a tape measure in her purse. I'd seen her use it on lawn decor, which is either dedication or madness depending on your angle. But Miranda had mastered what I call corporate condescension, that tone that makes "have a blessed day" sound like a threat. She'd flash that tight-lipped grin when she spoke to me, always sliding in a little jabs about maintaining community standards, while her eyes said something else, about blue-collar retirees who didn't know their place. The morning the tide turned, I was wrestling a stubborn window frame when I heard the crunch of expensive tires on gravel. Miranda's pristine white luxury sedan stopped at my boundary, and out she stepped in absurd high heels that immediately sank into the soft forest floor. She called out in a sweet voice, asking if I'd cleared this little project with the proper authorities. I gestured toward my bright yellow permit placard nailed to a nearby pine. "County says it's all above board," I told her in spirit. Her smile twitched for a blink, but I caught it. "County permits are one thing. HOA sign-off is another," she implied. That should have been my first clue, but I was focused on leveling that window. And honestly, I assumed any sensible person would know HOA lines ended at the street signs. 2 weeks later, the certified letter landed. $30,000 for a cabin on land that predated her precious HOA by 15 years. Sitting on my half-finished porch, coffee going bitter and cold, I read the kicker. Ignorance of our covenants is no excuse for flagrant violations. That's when I learned something about bullies. They bank on you being too worn out to fight. Bad bet. The next morning I did the reasonable thing and called Miranda directly. No sense letting this blow up if a simple talk could clear it. We were neighbors. Neighbors ought to solve things like adults. I introduced myself, said I'd received the letter, and explained the property sat outside HOA limits. The pause stretched long enough for me to hear my coffee maker gurgle, followed by the faint shuffle of papers. She came back with that syrupy corporate sweetness, insisting their authority extended to all member properties regardless of specific location, and that the covenants were clear. I mentioned my county permits. She noted their legal counsel had reviewed everything and the fine stood. Then she ended the call. I stared at the phone, listening to the empty tone, wondering if I'd slipped into a world where property lines were suggestions and HOA precedents ruled by divine right. The smell of scorched coffee snapped me back. Indignation doesn't stop appliances from overheating. Within a week, Miranda launched what I can only call a psychological operation. First came the complaint to county code enforcement claiming I was running an illegal rental without permits. The irony wasn't lost on me. She used my paperwork against me, twisting legal construction into something shady. Then the whisper campaign started. At the store, I'd catch fragments. Neighbors suddenly fascinated by shoelaces when I walked by. Poor man isn't thinking straight after his wife died, I overheard near the cereal aisle. Grief, people murmured, warps judgment. Nothing like small-town gossip to make you feel like you're swimming with piranhas. Her masterpiece was recruiting homeowners as a surveillance net. Every time I drove toward the mountain road, someone emerged from behind perfect hedges like suburban ninjas, phones out and faces concerned. When lumber deliveries came to the site, people slipped from behind trees snapping photos like I was rare wildlife. The breaking point was her showing up at my door with a clipboard and that predatory smile. She proposed an accommodation. Stop building and remove the structure, and they might reduce the fine to a more manageable $5,000 for administrative inconvenience. Looking at her, graciously discounting a manufactured penalty by 83%, something inside me shifted. You know that moment you realize someone thinks you're gullible enough to swallow the con? The metallic taste, the ringing in your ears? I told myself it was time to do my own research. That Tuesday, I hit the Jefferson County Courthouse armed with caffeine and resolve. 30 years with inspectors taught me this. Bureaucracies may be slow, but their paperwork doesn't lie. Every line, easement, and covenant gets recorded in triplicate, leaving a paper trail more reliable than a bloodhound. First surprise. The original Cedar Ridge Meadows Incorporation files showed HOA borders aren't gentlemen's agreements. They're legally mapped and filed with the county clerk. Second surprise. Uncle Hank's 40 acres were deeded and recorded 15 years before Cedar Ridge Meadows even broke ground. The land was grandfathered, existing rights that can't be overridden by later covenants, no matter the letterhead. The real bombshell lay in the association's own documents. Section 12C subsection 4 spelled out that the board's authority reached only properties within the platted boundaries recorded with Jefferson County on March 15, 2008. Sitting in that basement surrounded by musty paper and humming fluorescents, I read it 3 times to be sure I wasn't imagining it. My cabin wasn't just outside their reach. It was legally impossible for them to claim authority over it. Time to hire a surveyor. Walter Jensen came recommended by the clerk as a man who doesn't suffer fools and knows land law like his grandfather's fence posts. At 62, he had the weathered look of someone who spent 40 years arguing with property lines and winning more often than not. He set up his gear in morning mist, swirling around the scope like ghosts of old disputes, and chuckled that these suburban kingdoms always treat lines as suggestions. GPS doesn't lie, he said in essence, and neither does good surveying. 3 hours later, we had it. 847 feet. My cabin sat exactly 847 feet outside Cedar Ridge Meadows' legal boundary. I mailed certified copies of the survey to every board member with a courteous request to withdraw the fine and issue a formal apology. Miranda replied within 48 hours declaring surveyor error and that the fine stood. Pay now or face a property lien. That's when I knew this wasn't about lines anymore. It was about control and a person who'd rather crush a neighbor than admit she was wrong. A lien on my house over a cabin beyond her jurisdiction hit different. The fine was theoretical money. Awful, but survivable. A lien on my primary home was my equity. Everything June and I built in 30 years. Miranda had just escalated from neighborhood nuisance to a real threat. Within a week, a sleek black sedan rolled into my driveway, and out stepped a man in a $1,000 suit holding a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Behind him came Miranda, wearing her best concerned neighbor expression and clutching a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Mr. Red," the suit said as he extended a manicured hand, "I'm attorney Leonard Pratt from Pratt Holden Associates. We represent the Cedar Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association." I'd heard of that outfit. They specialized in what they called community governance disputes, which is lawyer talk for crushing homeowners who color outside the lines. Their billboards along Highway 6 featured grinning attorneys posed in front of gates with slogans like, "Protecting your investment and community standards matter." Pratt said he was there to discuss my unfortunate situation and, with theatrical precision, snapped open his briefcase. Miranda's concerns, he explained, were serious. The cease and desist order he handed me was a masterpiece of intimidation. 23 pages of whereases and heretofores that boiled down to "stop building now, or we'll make your life miserable in ways you can't imagine." But that's where Miranda made her first tactical misstep. She got greedy. While Pratt droned on about harmony and safeguarding property values, she ran her own little inspection tour of my yard. Through the kitchen window, I watched her measure the gap between my fence and the sidewalk with her trusty tape, photograph the angle of my mailbox, and, no joke, count the decorative rocks in my flower bed. It clicked. This wasn't only about the cabin anymore. She was building a case for blanket violations, hunting for excuses to layer on more penalties. The next morning, a new certified letter arrived. Apparently, my mailbox sat 2.3 inches too close to the sidewalk. Violation: $500. My fence stain was weathered beyond community standards. Violation: $750. And my pickup, the same truck I'd parked in my own driveway for 8 years, was now branded a commercial vehicle prohibited in residential areas. Violation: $1,200. I sat at my kitchen table, ringed by legal paperwork and violation slips, feeling like I was sinking into bureaucratic quicksand. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the bitter taste of unfairness rising in my throat. That's when I remembered something my old union steward used to say. When management starts waving fancy lawyers, it's time to learn their rulebook. Back to the courthouse I went, but this time with a different mission. 3 days of digging through public records taught me more about HOA operations than I'd ever wanted to know. Turns out these associations are required to file yearly reports with the Colorado Secretary of State, full of detailed financial statements. And those numbers told a story worth reading. Cedar Ridge Meadows, HOA, collected roughly $180,000 each year in dues and fees, but their reported expenses painted a curious picture. Legal costs alone totaled nearly $45,000, about a quarter of their entire budget. For a quiet community of 120 homes, where the biggest drama was usually someone's Christmas lights staying up too long, that figure was outrageous. Then I hit the jackpot buried deep in the vendor payments. Pratt Holden Associates had received $67,000 over 18 months, supposedly for covenant enforcement services. That worked out to about $3,700 every month in legal fees for a neighborhood where people mostly argued about mailbox colors. Either Cedar Ridge was the most lawsuit-happy community in Colorado, or someone was very comfortable spending everyone's money on intimidation. I decided to test a hunch. That evening, I started knocking on doors asking a simple question. Had anyone else received legal threats from the HOA? The answers were eye-opening. Martha Henderson had been fined $800 for planting tulips instead of HOA-approved daisies. Bob Schmidt had been hit with a $1,500 penalty for installing a satellite dish deemed visually disruptive. Jennifer Walsh was forced to pay for running a home-based accounting business, supposedly violating commercial activity rules. Every single one of those violations had triggered expensive letters from Pratt's firm, and in every case, homeowners had paid rather than fight. The pattern was clear. Miranda had turned HOA enforcement into a money-making scheme, with Pratt as her collection arm. But here's what she hadn't counted on. I was retired, angry, and had nothing but time. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, demanding a full audit of Cedar Ridge Meadows' finances. Then I mailed certified letters to every homeowner, detailing the legal fee spending and asking pointed questions about where their dues were really going. Miranda's response came fast. Another certified letter, this time threatening defamation charges for spreading false information. But the tone was different. It wasn't confident anymore. It sounded nervous. She was running scared, and I could feel it. Scared people in power don't retreat, though. They double down. The next escalation came as an emergency community meeting notice slid under every door in Cedar Ridge Meadows. The subject: urgent community safety concerns regarding rogue member actions. Scheduled for Thursday evening at the community hall, the agenda read like something out of a political smear campaign. Item 1. Discussion of member harassment and defamation. Item 2. Proposal for a special assessment to fund legal defense. Item 3. Possible suspension of member privileges for community disruption. Translation: Miranda planned to paint me as a dangerous troublemaker, make everyone pay to fund her legal war chest, and kick me out of the HOA entirely. Never mind that she still claimed jurisdiction over my cabin. The woman had a gift for turning victory into self-destruction through pure vindictiveness. I spent the next 3 days preparing for that meeting like a trial attorney. Walter Jensen helped me craft a visual presentation showing exactly where the HOA boundaries stopped and my property began. We printed aerial maps, boundary diagrams, and copies of those financial reports on foam boards large enough for the back row to see. Thursday night arrived gray and misty, the air heavy with the smell of wet pine and a brewing storm. The community center buzzed with unease as neighbors filed in, many carrying copies of my letter about legal spending. I could see the split instantly: Miranda's loyalists sitting up front, her skeptics huddling in the back. Miranda opened the meeting in her best navy blazer, her smile cold enough to chill coffee. "We're here," she announced, "to address concerns about a member who's chosen to disrupt our community harmony with false accusations." She gestured toward me like I was a hazard sign. I stood up, foam boards in hand, and asked one simple question that changed everything. "Mrs. Keaton, before we talk about my alleged harassment, could you explain where exactly the HOA's authority begins and ends?" Her practiced composure wavered. "Our authority extends to all member properties as clearly stated in our covenants." I unfolded my first display board and pointed at the aerial photo. "According to Jefferson County records, our jurisdiction stops here, at Maple Crest Road. My cabin is here." I tapped a spot clearly outside the boundary line, 847 feet beyond her reach. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Martha Henderson raised her hand. "If his cabin's outside our boundary, why are we fining him for it?" Miranda's voice went sugar-sweet again, explaining that property boundaries were complex. That's when a voice from the back cut through the room. "No, they're not." It was Walter Jensen, still in his work jacket, holding a rolled-up document that crackled when he moved. "Boundaries are legally defined and recorded. This cabin sits on land that predates your HOA by 15 years. The crowd swarmed forward as Walter unrolled the official survey across the front table. Homeowners crowded around, pointing, whispering, while Miranda stood frozen. Then Bob Schmidt raised the question that blew the lid off. "If we're spending $67,000 on lawyers for bogus claims, what other fines might be fake?" That opened the floodgates. One by one, people started sharing their own stories. Jennifer's phantom business restriction, Tom Bradley's fence code mismatch, Maria Santos's mailbox color mandate that didn't exist anywhere in the documents. Every case had one thing in common: inflated legal correspondence and coerced payments. The pattern was unmistakable. Miranda had been manufacturing violations to pad revenue. "This is ridiculous," she finally snapped, her mask cracking. "You people don't understand how hard it is to maintain standards when dealing with ungrateful residents who question everything. These fees protect your property values." The room fell silent. In that stillness, everyone finally saw her for what she was: a dictator hiding behind paperwork. Walter's voice sliced through the tension. "Ma'am, Protecting property values doesn't mean violating property rights. That's when I played my last card. I unfolded one more foam board. Speaking of spending, let's talk about the $23,000 collected for playground improvements that never happened. Miranda went pale. The revolution had just begun. Miranda's face drained of color, and the room thickened with that kind of tense silence that comes right before a thunderclap. That playground fund is being held pending contractor negotiations, she stammered, her voice shaky and rehearsed, like she'd practiced the excuse in front of a mirror. For 3 years? Bob Schmidt called from the back. My kids have been waiting since kindergarten. They're in middle school now. That's when the most unexpected person in the room shuffled forward. Josephine Carter, 78, barely 5 feet tall, but with the presence of someone who'd stared down tougher bullies than Miranda in her lifetime. She carried a weathered cardboard box that looked like it had survived more than a few garage sales. Mrs. Keaton, she said, her tone calm but cutting, I think it's time we discuss my late husband's files. The room froze. Even the heating vents seemed to stop humming. Harold was HOA treasurer for 12 years before his stroke, Josephine continued, setting the box on the table with a heavy thud. He kept impeccable records, bank statements, receipts, meeting minutes, cross-referenced and dated. Miranda turned an alarming shade of green. Mrs. Carter, I don't think private financial records are appropriate for— These aren't private, Josephine interrupted, her hand steady as she lifted the lid. Harold always said HOA finances should be clear as daylight. He sent copies of everything to the State Oversight Board every year, just like the law requires. She pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Discrepancies. 2019, 2022. In Harold's tidy handwriting, he noticed some irregularities, missing receipts, unexplained payments, checks to vendors who never provided services. He was preparing to address it at the 2022 annual meeting. But then he had his stroke. And you, she turned toward Miranda, offered to take over his duties. So generous, so convenient. She spread Harold's evidence across the table. Bank statements showing checks to non-existent contractors. Invoices for legal fees triple the normal rate. Payments to Cedar Ridge Property Management, LLC, a company that, according to Harold's notes, didn't exist except on paper and shared Miranda's home address. Harold spent months reconciling these, Josephine said, her tone unwavering. He found roughly $47,000 in unexplained expenses over 3 years, money that should have gone to playgrounds, snow removal, and real maintenance. Miranda sputtered. That's completely false. Harold was confused after his stroke. His records aren't reliable. Josephine's gaze went icy. My husband's mind was sharp as a tack until the day he passed. Are you suggesting 40 years of accounting experience just vanished because of a mild stroke? Walter leaned closer to the documents, tracing his finger across the figures. These aren't mistakes, he said firmly. This is systematic. It's deliberate manipulation. The puzzle pieces locked into place in my head like tumblers in a safe. Miranda's obsession with my cabin wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about keeping her scheme from unraveling. The bogus fines, the inflated legal costs, the special assessments, all of it had been designed to cover money she'd already siphoned away. She wasn't running a Homeowners Association. She was running an embezzlement racket using fear and legal bluster to keep people silent. Josephine looked around the room, closing Harold's folder like a gavel. So neighbors, she said, what are we going to do about it? That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about justice for everyone Miranda had robbed. The meeting ended with Miranda storming out, muttering about elder abuse and defamation. But the spark had been lit. The next night, Josephine's cozy living room turned into mission control for what Walter jokingly named Operation Accountability. The smell of strong coffee mixed with something new, determination. 23 homeowners crowded inside, ready to fight back. Walter had brought backup. His friend Benjamin Cole, a retired attorney who'd spent 40 years making crooked officials squirm. At 65, Ben still carried that quiet courtroom confidence of someone who'd seen every dirty trick in the book. Here's what we're dealing with, he said, spreading documents across Josephine's dining table like blueprints. What Mrs. Keaton's done constitutes multiple felonies: embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. He pointed at Harold's neatly tabbed records. The beauty of financial crime is it always leaves a paper trail. Martha Henderson raised her hand. What about all those fake fines she's been slapping on people? Also illegal, Ben replied, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. An HOA can only enforce covenants that actually exist in recorded agreements. Making up rules to collect money is fraud, plain and simple. That night, I learned something they should teach in civics class. HOAs are corporations, subject to state and federal oversight. They can't just invent charges and demand payment any more than your local grocery store can bill you for walking through the door. Walter started cataloging everything on his laptop: Harold's financial proof, the property boundary survey, the documented harassment, every fake violation. Jennifer Walsh volunteered to gather statements from every homeowner fined in the past 3 years. If we're doing this, she said, we're doing it right. Bob Schmidt offered to photograph every supposed violation to prove they were nonsense. Tom Bradley, a retired IRS auditor, volunteered to cross-check every HOA payment against actual maintenance work. By the end of the night, we had a plan. Hit them from all sides. File complaints with the Colorado Secretary of State for corporate fraud, the Jefferson County DA for criminal embezzlement, and the Department of Regulatory Agencies for HOA misconduct. Meanwhile, Ben would prepare a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds and damages. The key, Ben said as Josephine poured more coffee, is coordination. We attack from 3 directions at once so they can't focus their defenses on any single front. But our secret weapon was solidarity. Tom's accounting expertise, Jennifer's organizational drive, Walter's technical precision, Josephine's moral authority. It was a powerhouse team. We weren't just a group of angry homeowners anymore. We were a movement. Sure enough, Walter's warning about Miranda's desperation proved prophetic. 3 nights later, my security camera caught a figure in dark clothes sneaking up to my generator with a crowbar. Expensive hiking boots, unmistakable posture. It was her, Miranda Keaton, HOA president turned vandal. This time, she'd picked the wrong man. I sent the footage straight to the sheriff, our lawyer, and the district attorney. Within 24 hours, she was facing charges for trespassing and property damage. The day the sheriff's deputy delivered the warrant, the entire neighborhood knew. The woman who'd lectured everyone about community standards had been caught on tape destroying property like a petty criminal. From that moment on, the tables turned. Neighbors who'd once been silent found their voices. The hunter had become the hunted. The hunter had become the hunted, and Miranda was starting to realize just how trapped she really was. The vandalism charges shattered the perfect image she'd spent years curating. Within hours of the sheriff's visit, word spread across Cedar Ridge Meadows like wildfire. The same neighbors she'd bullied were now whispering about her with the same relish she once reserved for gossiping about others. But instead of backing down, Miranda spiraled. A cornered narcissist is a dangerous creature, and she was about to prove it. Her first move was to hire a crisis management firm. Apparently, there are entire companies that specialize in scrubbing the reputations of corrupt HOA officials. Within 2 days, glossy anonymous flyers began appearing on doorsteps and car windshields, claiming I was a mentally unstable widower, harassing the board and endangering community safety. Professionally printed, full of bullet points and fake quotes from neighbors, they looked like political smear ads. The social media campaign followed, fake profiles in local community groups, posting about my aggressive behavior and vendetta against the HOA. It was all carefully written to sow doubt without crossing into outright defamation. Walter's daughter spotted the first fake profile. The woman's name was Sarah Johnson, supposedly a concerned Cedar Ridge resident. A reverse image search revealed the profile photo came from a stock photography model in Nebraska. "She's trying to control the story before it breaks," said Ben Cole when we regrouped at Josephine's living room. "Classic PR strategy. Discredit the whistleblower before the truth gets out." But we were already uncovering something much larger than a single corrupt president. Tom Bradley's forensic accounting revealed a fraud network that made our original $47,000 figure look like pocket change. Cedar Ridge Property Management, LLC. The fake company Miranda used wasn't a loan shell. It was part of a web of dummy businesses funneling kickbacks from inflated contracts. Lawn care, snow removal, maintenance, even insurance policies, all overpriced by 30 to 40% to generate secret revenue. What began as a neighborhood scandal had ballooned into a six-figure criminal enterprise. Jennifer's door-to-door documentation added another twist. 3 other HOAs in Jefferson County were reporting eerily similar patterns: phony violations, bloated legal fees, the same contractors, and the same law firm names popping up in records. Ben leaned back, exhaling through his nose. This isn't just one bad apple. This is organized fraud spanning multiple communities. That's federal territory. But Miranda wasn't done swinging. The next trick was an emergency assessment notice, slipped under every door on a Friday night, calling for a vote to raise $2,500 per household to fund legal defense against frivolous complaints. She'd scheduled the meeting for Monday, giving everyone just enough time to panic but not enough to investigate. But her timing backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying behind her, homeowners began questioning why the HOA needed nearly $300,000 in defense money. Martha Henderson fired the first shot in an email chain that spread like wildfire. Has anyone actually seen proof that Mr. Red's complaints are frivolous? Within hours, 23 people replied with their own stories of questionable fines and shady bookkeeping. By Sunday, Miranda's last-ditch fundraiser had turned into an accidental referendum on her corruption. Desperate people do desperate things. Monday morning, Child Protective Services showed up at my door. The anonymous report claimed I was a mentally unstable recluse who'd been stalking neighborhood kids. It was a masterstroke of malicious timing, designed to tie me up in red tape and destroy my credibility just as our evidence went public. But Miranda had underestimated one crucial factor. Professionals can smell false reports a mile away. The investigator, a weary woman named Janet Sullivan, listened as I laid out the timeline. The bogus fines, the intimidation, the vandalism footage, the community's growing investigation. I showed her the security video of Miranda attacking my generator and Harold Carter's financial records. She closed her notebook with a sigh. Mr. Red, in my experience, people who steal money from their neighbors rarely have genuine concerns about child safety. Consider this case closed. But Janet's visit sparked something unexpected: media attention. Apparently, false CPS reports tied to HOA corruption make for excellent human interest television. By Thursday morning, a reporter from Denver Channel 7 was calling, asking if I'd share my story for an investigative segment on HOA abuse. That same afternoon, Miranda announced her own press conference. She'd hold it at the community center Friday to address malicious rumors and restore trust. Watching her double down on public spectacle was like seeing someone pour gasoline on a fire and call it rain. Walter and I arrived early, curious to see the circus. Miranda stood at a makeshift podium, running through her talking points in front of a mirror. She'd even arranged the folding chairs in perfect rows, as if order could disguise panic. By the time the cameras rolled, nearly 80 residents had packed the hall, along with local reporters and a couple of familiar faces from Channel 7's investigative team. Miranda began with rehearsed confidence, reading from her script about protecting property values and defending community integrity against harassment. She described me as a grieving, unstable man obsessed with destroying the HOA, but the mask cracked when a reporter asked, "Mrs. Keaton, can you explain why the HOA paid $23,000 to a management company registered to your home address?" Her voice wavered. "Those are complex financial arrangements not appropriate for public discussion." Then Bob Schmidt shouted from the back, "What about the playground money?" "Financial details are confidential," she snapped, her composure melting like wax under studio lights. That's when Josephine Carter rose slowly from the front row, Harold's folder in her hands. "Mrs. Keaton," she said, "nothing about community finances should be secret from the people paying for them." The room exploded. Homeowners started shouting questions, waving violation notices, demanding explanations. Miranda tried to outtalk them, but once people have smelled the truth, they stop listening to lies. Then Jennifer Walsh raised her hand and asked the question that ended Miranda's career. If Mr. Red's complaints were false, why did you try to smash his generator with a crowbar? Silence. Miranda froze, eyes darting between the cameras and the crowd. That's completely false, she shrieked. This is a setup by people trying to destroy community governance. But she never reached the exit. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez was waiting in the lobby with an arrest warrant for grand theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The cameras caught every second as Miranda Keaton, self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, was led out in handcuffs. The footage went viral within hours. By the next morning, HOA president arrested for embezzlement was trending across Colorado, then across the country. People were sharing it like wildfire, every frustrated homeowner cheering for long overdue karma. But the real climax came the following Tuesday at an emergency HOA meeting attended by local authorities, state officials, and, to everyone's surprise, federal agents. Benjamin Cole presented our compiled evidence to a packed room. Harold Carter's meticulous records, forged checks, shell companies, fake invoices. The total, $180,000 stolen over 3 years. The gasps from the crowd sounded like an exhale of years of pent-up frustration. Then Walter took the floor, revealing that our case had triggered a wider investigation. The FBI had traced similar frauds to 4 other communities, all tied to the same contractor network. When Special Agent Rebecca Torres stepped forward, you could have heard a pin drop. Based on evidence provided by this community, she announced, we've opened a federal case involving racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. This morning, warrants were executed at 17 locations, and 6 individuals were taken into custody. The realization hit like a wave. Our small-town HOA battle had uncovered a statewide fraud ring. But the moment that burned itself into memory came when Josephine took the microphone. Harold always said democracy only works when good people refuse to stay silent, she said, voice steady. For years, fear kept us quiet. But tonight proves that when neighbors stand together, even corruption can't withstand the truth. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Afterward, the community voted unanimously to remove the old board, void all fraudulent fines, and adopt new transparency rules requiring open audits and homeowner votes on all major spending. A month later, the court returned $247,000 in restitution to Cedar Ridge Meadows as part of a multi-million-dollar federal recovery. 6 months later, Miranda Keaton was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for racketeering, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge's words said it best. The defendant turned community service into self-service, betraying the trust of her neighbors for greed. But the victory wasn't just financial, it was cultural. The new board transformed the HOA into a model of open governance. The long-delayed playground was finally built and named the Harold Carter Memorial Park. Josephine cried as children played on swings, bought with money that had once been stolen. As for me, the cabin that started it all became something of a local landmark. A reminder that even ordinary people can change everything when they refuse to back down. Walter and I launched a small business, Boundary Integrity Solutions, helping other homeowners stand up to corrupt HOAs. Josephine joined as our advisor, guiding communities through reform. Our story even inspired the Colorado legislature to pass the Cedar Ridge Accountability Act, requiring strict oversight and whistleblower protections for all HOAs in the state. Now, every morning, I sit on my cabin porch, breathing that sharp pine air, sipping coffee that tastes a little like justice. I can hear laughter from the playground in the distance. The smell of sawdust has faded, but the feeling of peace remains. June would have loved this view, the sound of a community finally healing. On the wall above my workbench hangs a simple note written in Josephine's careful script. Harold would be proud. So here's what I learned from fighting a corrupt HOA and accidentally triggering a federal investigation. Bullies survive on silence, but once you document, organize, and stand shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, even the strongest corruption can't survive sunlight. Now it's your turn. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments below. You're not alone. And if you enjoy seeing justice served one crooked board at a time, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Because next week, I'll tell you how we helped a 76-year-old widow turn the tables on the contractor who tried to steal her life savings. Sometimes fighting back isn't just about revenge. It's about protecting those who can't fight for themselves.